from Brussels. I'm Ian Lesser from GMF here in Brussels, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you today to this event to launch findings from our just completed survey on Turkish perceptions of the European Union 2022. It's actually the second that we've done in this series of surveys. And it's a great pleasure to be able to have an opportunity to see the findings and also to have a discussion around them with our discussants, but also with all of you. Let me just maybe give you a little bit of a roadmap to what we're going to do. First, I'm going to ask my colleague, Kadri Tastan, who's a senior fellow and leads our Turkey program, TOBB Turkey program here in Brussels. And then we're going to we'll hear from him, go through the findings in some detail, maybe for 20 minutes. And then we're going to have a discussion with three really terrific people who are joining us today. First, Senem Aydin Düzgit, who's professor of international relations at Sabanci University in Istanbul. Paul Levin, who is director in Stockholm University Institute for Turkish Studies. And Günter Seufert, director of the Center for Applied Turkey Studies at the German Institute for International Security Affairs, SWP. Thanks to all of them for joining today. I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic discussion, and it takes place, I think you'll agree, at a time when there's very keen interest in what Turkey thinks. So we're going to have an opportunity to hear about that. Kadri, with this, let me turn it over to you and very much look forward to the findings.
Thank you very much, Ian. Good afternoon or good morning if you are joining us from the United States. It's a really great pleasure for me to present the results, the finding of our second survey, and let me to thank again, first of all, to my colleagues Özgür Unlu, Hisarcıklı, and Ceylan Canbilek from Ankara office. They also work enormously with me, and we are very grateful to them. So I will quickly share my screen and share with you the key findings, but let me to first put this actually on. Now we have all the results on the GMF website. You can, and my colleague will share with you soon in the chat. And please go there. You will have, because we will not have the time to present you all the results. It's a really long survey, but there you can see the key findings report and also presentations in Turkish and also in English. Now I will share my screen. Can you see it? Is it good? Yeah, that's great. So, well, actually, the Turkish perception of the European Union public opinion survey presented a detailed picture of public perception of the European Union, EU-Turkey relations, and Turkish foreign policy. The survey was carried out in 27 provinces between March 2 and 26 by means of face-to-face interviews, with 2,180 respondents representing Turkey's adult population. Let me also to precise this, the field study began a few days after the Russian invasion started, but the question sets was fixed beforehand. So that's why you will have some findings about this war, but not much, because as I said, we prepared the questions before the invasion. So just let me, I would like to also precise that the study's margin of error is 2% based on the simple random sampling method, and the field research was carried out by Infacto in Turkey, and I would like to also thank them for their great job. So let's move to the foreign policy perception first. And when we asked about Turkey's two most important partner countries, as you can see, the 47.2% of the respondents mentioned Azerbaijan, followed by Germany with 15.4%, which is not surprising. But the Russian Federation, as you can see, with 13.8% as opposed to 18.6% last year. When we asked about the biggest threat as a country or group of countries against Turkey's national interests, the 58.3% of the respondents mentioned the United States, like last year almost, followed by Russian Federation with the 31%, as opposed to 19% last year, and Israel with the 29.4%. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we can see that actually has had a negative impact on how the people in Turkey perceive Russia. So after invasion, the Turkish citizens have been less likely to perceive Russia as a partner and more likely to see it as a security threat. So when we ask about their opinion, positive opinion on different leaders, basically they're not really much positive opinion on the foreign leaders, but here also you can see that the image of President Putin has deteriorated. So almost 5 points. When we ask about two most important roles Turkey could play in the world, 63.5% of the respondents mentioned being an economically developed country. 37% of respondents mentioned being a politically strong country, and 36.8% of the respondents mentioned being a country which is influential in military issues. But for the 18-24 age group is pretty much the same, as you can see. But you can see that a model country, if they want to really see Turkey as a model country, it's almost 14% want to see Turkey as a model country. Here you can see that Turkey's public opinion seems to favor the European Union as the closest partner in dealing with international matters. This trend is even stronger in the 18-24 age group compared to the general public. When we ask about which country or which group of countries Turkey should cooperate most closely with on international issues, 33.1% of the respondents pointed out the EU. And in the second, here you can see we are comparing with last year's finding, and you can see that 5.6% of the respondents, as opposed to the 14.7% last year, preferred Russia Federation. So again, the societal perception on cooperation with Russia decreased quite significantly. The survey demonstrates people believe the EU's effectiveness for solving global problems compared to the other countries or group of countries would lead to better results for humanity. However, this opinion is more pronounced in the 18-24 age group compared to the general population. And when we ask which way is the best to ensure the peace in the world, as you can see, the majority of the respondents think that the best way to ensure the peace is to resort to negotiations for the resolution of disputes. When we ask how Turkey should respond to the Russian invasion, as you can see, the 43% of the respondents said Turkey should mediate between the parties, and 40.1% said Turkey should stay neutral. So only 8.5% said Turkey should act together with Ukraine, and only 4.4% said Turkey should act together with Russia. When asked about how the conflict in Syria should be resolved, as you can see, the 50% of respondents said Syria's territorial integrity should be maintained, but Assad should be replaced. And here we can see that the respondents in the 18-24 age group were more likely to find international organizations trustworthy, especially in the EU and ECHR. The trust is quite high. And here we are comparing with last year. As you can see here, 47.7% of the respondents, as opposed to the 40% in 2021, expressed their trust in the EU. 48% of the respondents, as opposed to 49 last year, expressed their trust in the European Court of Human Rights. And when it comes to the NATO, 39.4% of the respondents, as opposed to the 32% last year, said that they trusted NATO. So the trust increased a bit here in NATO, you can see that. Now I would like to move on EU perception, to focus a bit on the EU-Turkey relations and EU accession process, etc. So, of course, we are always asking this question, first of all, a hypothetical referendum on Turkey's EU membership, and you can see that the 61.4% of the respondents, as opposed to the 60% last year, stated that they would vote yes if there was a referendum on Turkey's full EU membership this Sunday. And this tendency to vote yes is in a possible referendum on Turkey's EU membership is explicitly stronger in 18-24 age group. And when we ask if they will personally benefit from the Turkey's EU membership, you can see that the majority of the respondents think that they will personally benefit from Turkey's EU membership. This tendency is again much higher for 18-24 age group. And here we see the attitude against Europeans. You can see that the respondent in the 18-24 age group appear to have a much more positive opinion of than the general population, but even for the general population, the attitudes towards European is quite high. However, the confidence that Turkey will become an EU member remains quite low. As you can see, 53% of the respondents believe that the EU had no intention of accepting Turkey as a member. And here we are asking, when we ask about two important factors that would facilitate Turkey's membership, you can see that 49.6% of respondents said improving the Turkish economy, 40% improving human rights in Turkey, and 34.7% mentioned realization of required legal reforms in Turkey. When we ask about the most important benefits EU membership would bring to Turkey, almost 30% of the respondents said the economic development and decrease in unemployment and the cost of living. 14.6% of the respondents said promoting democracy and the widespread participation of the people in government, and 14.4% of the respondents said increased power in international area. For the 18-24 age group, improved democracy is, I mean, they mention, and it seems to be higher. They think that it will really bring more benefits in this area, in democracy. When we ask whether they approve of steps Turkey has taken in the past for the EU accession process or the steps it may take in the future, you can see that 43% of the respondent approved of the necessary condition for freedom of thought and expression, while 19.7% of the respondent disapproved. Again, 38.3% of the respondents approved the abolition of laws that prevent citizens from learning in their language, mother tongue, while 19.1% of the respondents disapproved. And here, what is interesting, as you can see, two issues that the rate of disapproval is really high. One is Cyprus issue, and the other one is so problems with the Greece. So the 17.7% of the respondents approved of creating a solution for existing problem in Cyprus through the mutual compromises, while 42.9% of the respondents disapproved. And here it's a quite an interesting one. Actually, as you know, there are some widespread views in Turkey about the intention of the West regarding Turkey, and sometimes we call it Senem syndrome. So you can see that even if there is a really positive attitude towards Europeans, but there are also this kind of prejudice again. 60, as you can see, 2.4% of the respondents believed European countries wanted to divide and disintegrate Turkey as they had the Ottoman Empire in the past. 69.8% of the respondents believed European countries have helped strengthen separatist organization in Turkey. 50.5% of the respondents said that the reforms undertaken to become an EU member were no different from capitulations, etc., etc. But it seems to be less pronounced among the youth, this kind of views. Well, actually, we also ask about the, you know, that the custom union is really today one of the rare institutional link between the EU and Turkey. So we ask about custom union. As you can see, the knowledge about the custom union is really, really low. But it's not very surprising because it's a really technical area, I may say. And there's no visa liberalization, and few sectors are involved, and it doesn't really touch people in their daily life. So they don't have really enough knowledge about it, and it's not really surprising. So obviously the support for the modernization of the custom union to add the different you know, adding agriculture sector, public procurement of services. As you can see, almost the plurality don't have an answer or doesn't want to answer this question. Well, now here I want to bring your attention to this slide because I think it's really important, this one. Actually, the Ukrainian, we don't see the details here because you see only some numbers, but when you will have a look on the key findings report, you will see the details. Actually, the Ukrainian war is really the only conflict where the plurality of respondents think that the EU and Turkey has common interest. In the rest of the conflict or issue mentioned here, the majority think that they have conflicting interests. While 41.5% of the respondents said that Turkey and the EU had common interest in the situation in Ukraine, 32.9% said they had conflicting interests. This is really important result, I think, because even for the migration issue, almost 50% of the respondents think that the EU and Turkey have conflicting interests, which is quite surprising. When we ask here, we ask about about three policies that they will make most significant contribution to improve the relations between EU and Turkey. The 56.2% of the respondents mentioned visa liberalization. 43% respondents said cooperating on the issue of migration and refugees, and 41% of the respondents said cooperating in the fight against terrorism. And here, actually, you know that there are six criteria that Turkey should fulfill to have a visa liberalization agreement with the European Union. So here we are asking about this criteria that Turkey must fulfill for this. And as you can see that 60% of the respondents supported revision of the legislation and practices on terrorism to match the European standard. whereas 34.8% of respondents did not support such provisions. 62% of the respondents supported effective judicial cooperation with all EU member states regarding criminal matters, whereas 33% of respondents did not support such cooperation. Again, 66% of the respondents supported harmonizing legislation on personal data protection with the EU standard, whereas only 26 disapproved such action. And Cyprus issue, a question about Cyprus issue. Of course, the Cyprus issue is one of the difficult topic when it comes to EU-Turkey relations. Of course, is important when we ask about ask how the Cyprus problem should be resolved. And as you can see, 39.4% of the respondents said Northern Cyprus should join Turkey. 32% said there should be 2 states on the island, and only 11.6% said that there should be a bicommunal EU member state called the Republic of Cyprus, and only 11% said that there should be 1 EU member states Republic of Cyprus. Last 2 slides. Actually, you will see that the awareness on environmental issue is continuing to grow in Turkey. The findings also are showing this is really a great news. While 75.6% of the respondents supported the view that protecting the environment should be given priority, even if it's resulted in slow economic growth and job losses. But only 22.2% of the respondents supported the view that the economic growth and job opportunities should be given priority, even when harmful to the environment. And the last slide, here also you can see that the 62% of the respondents said the climate change was a very, very serious threat for the planet, while 30% said it was a moderate threat. You shouldn't forget that for Turkey last year was Turkey actually suffered incredibly from wildfire, inundation, and drought. So I think this really played a role on this. And I will stop here. Thank you for listening. And if you have any question, we'll answer. Over to you, Ian.
Kadri, thank you very, very much. This is really quite extraordinary. It says a lot of things which we're going to have a chance to discuss. It's billed as Perceptions of the European Union, which of course it is in large measure, but it also tells us a lot of other things of interest. And so we're going to ask a little bit about that, but maybe let me turn now to our discussants and ask them sort of what they heard, what they saw, how they read this. I mean, there are some contradictory things, but as we know, publics very often people in general hold contradictory views in their mind at once. So that's not quite so surprising. In general, it seems to me, big picture, there's a lot of very positive news here in terms of perceptions of not just the EU, but also the West, if I can say. But there's also a lot of very problematic things when it comes to sort of detailed views about convergence of interest and so on. But anyway, not to say too much more, Senem, if I may, let me go to you first, and for a couple of minutes, share with us some reactions, and then we'll go to Paul.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ian. And thank you very much, Kadri, also for the comprehensive presentation of the results. Now, my comments will mainly focus on 3 points. One, under anti-Westernism, what I see regarding the debates on anti-Westernism in Turkey. Second is more on the bilateral conflict areas. And thirdly, scope for cooperation. And I'm going to make 6 comments that basically fall under these sort of bigger headings. So they're very brief, don't worry, just a few sentences under each. Now, on anti-Westernism, on the issue of anti-Westernism, I mean, of course, we've been hearing a lot about the rise of anti-Westernism in Turkey today. We've been hearing a lot of pro-Russian views, for instance, in Turkish media, government-sponsored media, but also on the left as well regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict, etc. But what this data has been telling us that we should have a much more nuanced understanding or approach to understanding, to basically seeing what the public means by the West. And here I think it's very important to distinguish between Europe, the EU, and the United States. I mean, when we look at the data, we still see that anti-Americanism seems to be high among the Turkish public, but I think it's difficult to make that claim for Europe. So for the Turkish public, Europe still seems to be an important partner. Trust in the European Union seems to have even increased in the past year, and it seems to be much more pronounced among the youth, which I think is also very important because, I mean, I remember that this discussion from the past year's survey as well, where we focused in particular on this intergenerational differences regarding perceptions in Europe, as well as other things that we can discuss. And we see that this trust extends to other Western institutions like the European Court of Human Rights or even NATO. And here the interesting thing is the EU is seen as a preferred partner, I think, not just relative to US, but also to China and Russia as well, and to other competing illiberal actors in the neighborhood. And the same goes for support for EU membership. This still seems to be pretty high, again, considering the dismal state of the relations between EU and Turkey. But of course, the rest of the story is the same. Half of the population doesn't think that this is a realistic possibility. Now, one other thing I want to add about this perceptions on Europe as well, I think what the survey results are telling us is that despite all the talk, about the diminishing power of Europe as a normative actor, the European Union still has some normative appeal among parts of the Turkish constituencies. I mean, when you look at I looked yesterday night at the sort of breakdown of this data about, how much people associate Europe with freedom of expression, freedom of religion, use of Kurdish language, etc. And I see that these normative concerns come secondary to economics, which I don't think should be taken lightly. So those are my points on that. Now, a bit more about maybe on Russia. I think it's not too surprising that perceptions of Russia as a potential partner seems to have worsened or declined. This is important in showing, I think, that the war has had an impact in Turkey. And despite all that anti-Western rhetoric, this doesn't result in an increased support for Russia, just the opposite has taken place. And I think this is an important point. It shows that the Russian fear or skepticism from Russia seems to run deep in Turkey, despite all the recent overtures and opening up to Russia and closing up to Russia on the part of Ankara and the government. And I think that the Turkish public, it looks like they don't support anything more than a less asymmetrical or balanced relationship with Russia. And that sort of translates into their position on what the Turkish position should be regarding the war as well. Now, these are perhaps the more positive points. Now, on the conflictual issues, one thing that strikes me, of course, although it is not surprising, is the Cyprus issue. Now, I don't think there is a huge surprise there, but I think we have to see that around more than 70% of the Turkish population now either wishes to see annexation or two separate state solution. And I think this is important in showing that there is now very small scope and space for concession, at least as far as the public is concerned. And this becomes more concerning when you consider the other data that around almost half of the Turkish public opposes making any compromises in bilateral disputes with Greece. And I think that needs to be read together. So that's, I think, something that's a cause for concern. And a few words perhaps on where further cooperation or future cooperation might lie. Two things, I think, 3 points I think are worth making. One on visa liberalization, of course, where the public attitude seems to be quite favorable, and also for customs union modernization. And finally, of course, on climate. Now, I think these are the three areas that point to future cooperation, particularly if a different set of political actors come to power and the political constellations change in Turkey. There is significant public support for further engagement with the EU, starting with these grounds. And I think that's important. And of course, I mean, the awareness on climate is quite striking. It's recognized as a huge problem. It's recognized as a human-made problem where the public can point to whoever is actually responsible. But perhaps I personally would have also liked to see a question, perhaps for the future surveys, on how the Turkish public views Europe as a climate change actor. as a global actor that's active in climate change, how and whether they associate EU as a considerable global actor in the fight against climate change. And also, I would have liked to see whether there's a generational gap regarding the views on climate change as well. Maybe there is in the data and maybe I missed it, I don't know, but I think it would be interesting to see that too. So I'll finish it at that.
Thank you very much indeed. And it gives us a lot to continue to talk about, but also thank you for the suggestions about things we might look at in a little bit more detail. I was struck by many of the same things, in fact. I was also struck, and maybe discussants might want to comment on this too, that even for NATO, at about 40% or so of trust, I think back to years when we used to ask about this in our transatlantic trends survey. That's not bad. It's actually higher than it was historically, which I remember numbers kind of in the 30% range, which were at the low end for NATO allies. This was across the alliance. But, you know, at a time when people are distrustful of institutions, 40-odd% for something that's considered pretty controversial in Turkey, yeah. It's not terrible. But anyway, Paul, what struck you?
Well, I'm afraid that, I mean, much of the same things that struck Senem Hoca, so maybe I'll repeat a little bit of what she was saying, but I mean, in one sense, I'm happy to see that this survey sort of confirms my life choice, namely to study Turkey, because Turkey defies simple categorizations, right? I mean, you know, a country, you know, where you have, you know, to the east, strong Islamist government, as many, you know, point out. Others point to Turkey's Western orientation and sort of European heritage, and both, you know, there are aspects of everything in Turkey, and the complexity of the survey, I think, demands some attention. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that. On the one hand, we see strong support for EU membership, and that's encouraging. And while this data is not historical, if you look back to earlier data, you can see that support for EU membership has climbed back up consistently in the past years, after taking a sharp nosedive after 2004, 2005. And support is still not as overwhelming as it was back in the early 2000s when it was up in the 70%, but it's climbing up and it's high. And it's stronger, of course, among the youth. A question I have about this sort of generational difference that we see in much of the data, where if we generalize, the youth is more EU-friendly, generally more liberal, and the older generation slightly more conservative, and perhaps slightly more nationalistic, if you will. Is that a generational change, or is it an age change? In other words, is this something that will change as the younger generation gets older, they become more conservative? It tends to be the case. Or is it also that we're seeing a new generation that comes with different values? That's a question that I have. But so strong support for EU membership, strong support for the reforms that the EU has helped propel in Turkey when it comes to freedom of speech, abolition of death penalty, or strong, but at least support for these, including Kurdish language reforms, which I think was good. Support for improvements when it comes to human rights and democracy in Turkey is also encouraging to see. The perception of Europeans is very positive, and also, of course, the perception of EU as a big global actor that you want to cooperate with, and that can do something that has this sort of normative power that Senem Hoca spoke about. And then also areas of common interest, I think, is important to note. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, then, there is a rather striking perception of the US as the primary, major threat to Turkey, which is, problematic and interesting for a NATO ally. And I mean, I think you could, if we dig deeper into that, I think there's sort of a confluence. If you look at the political spectrum in Turkey, and here I'm sort of stealing, Kadri and I talked about this a bit yesterday, and I'm stealing his analysis a little bit here and adding to it myself, but I'm citing you now, Kadri. So I mean, on the the AKP government has been sort of blaming the US for the failed coup of 2016, claiming that they host the mastermind of the coup. There are, of course, US sanctions against Turkey for buying the S-400s. There's on the right in Turkey, there's a lot of resentment against the United States for supporting the Kurdish Syrian Kurds, the YPG SDF, of course. And then on the left, you have this longer tradition of anti-imperialism that also translates into anti-Americanism. So many different actors on across the spectrum have sort of come together in this perception of the US as a threat. But it is quite striking, and it kind of raises questions. Well, I think many in the West now are seeing the emergence of perhaps a new Cold War where Russia is the main threat, and you need sort of concerted, strong pushback against Russia in Ukraine and across the board. And here, Turkey does not have sort of an easy, natural place. If you look at this data, it's strongly supportive of the EU, but not really strongly supportive of the US. So, and if you add to that Turkish perceptions of how Turkey should respond to the Ukraine crisis, whereas most EU countries and the US have strongly backed the Ukraine with some exceptions, Turks generally want Turkey to be neutral and to serve as a mediator. That's a role for it to play, and which is playing successfully so far, but it also bodes for an uneasy place as a NATO ally. Let me just end by noting maybe a slightly different take on some common ground areas. I mean, I think visa liberalization is hugely popular in Turkey, but I think it's almost equally unpopular among many EU leaders. So it's a difficult challenge. And if you look at the data, there's strong support for example, changes in terror legislation among the Turkish population, but I wonder if they know what it entails. So I'm not sure that there's actual real agreement there. Custom union modernization. Well, the customs union has brought already a lot of benefits to Turkey, but there is not really a grasp of that or an understanding of those benefits. So I would focus on climate change, as Senem Hoca mentioned, as a potential area for innovative collaboration that is unproblematic and supported by both sides. And then maybe also student exchange issues. It's a small issue, but it is an important topic where there is some possibilities for commonalities. So let me just leave it at that.
Paul, thanks very much for that. And that again, at the end, you come to a point, as Senem did, about not so much suggestions perhaps for our further polling, although there's some of those in there embedded in your remarks, I think, but also question of, what could be on the agenda for, a so-called positive agenda with Turkey, that a strategic cooperation with Turkey that doesn't necessarily have to move quickly towards membership questions. And some of the things you mentioned, like climate, and the people-to-people aspect of this could be very high on that agenda. So thank you for that. Günter, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Also very shortly, because a lot of things have been mentioned and it's difficult to be the last in the row of speakers. But maybe starting with what Paul said, that the EU has been viewed as an important foreign policy actor the Turkish people are willing to cooperate with. I would take a more skeptical view. Why? Because we saw the survey was conducted in times of intense foreign policy tensions, the threat of war, or already started war, and Turkey also feeling insecure, more and more insecure. And there are naturally a lot of comments that same. Turkey for a long time perceived Russia as a rival you can handle with, you can deal with. And now it's evolving more into a potential threat. And we see that the assessment of Russia has sharply changed. But when we look at the assessment of Europe, and this is fascinating, as this is the second survey after 1 year, and we can compare what happened, and we see that there is almost no significant change in the assumption of Europe. when it comes to trust in the EU, when it comes to assumption when membership would actually occur, when it comes to what the membership would bring positive for Turkey or for the individual, when it comes to vote yes or no in a potential referendum on membership, and a lot of things related to Europe, we see almost no significant change. And I think this tells us that Europe has not played a significant role in the actual conflict. And this is the reason why there is no change in opinion, whereas there's a change in opinion on Russia. And therefore, I doubt that the positive image of Europe is very closely related to the disillusionment of Russia, for example, but also naturally of great skepticism towards the US, and not really a developed picture of perception of China. And therefore the EU as a well-known actor still makes some point, but I think it's not really, I don't know if we have really enough done for it. Second point I would mention, I see legal issues and democracy have become of even greater importance, and we see that there is growing awareness for the necessity of legal reforms for membership. We see more profiled perception of the EU as a supporter of democracy. And when it comes to the questions regarding what Turkey should do for visa liberalization, then we see greater readiness to change the anti-terror law, greater readiness for juridical cooperation with EU member states, more support for data protection measures, more support for cooperation with Europol, much greater support for anti-corruption measures, and greater support for implementation of the readmission agreement with the EU. Now, I think, leaving the last point aside, these are all legal issues that are really concerning also the individual. And therefore, I think the answers to these questions not only mirrors the desire for visa-free travel, but it mirrors also the desire for living in a state of law, and in a state where the rule of law is accepted. And I think this is a positive sign that there is still, or that the need of legal certainty and of impartial justice is so much expressed in my reading of the survey. And naturally, what comes to me as a very as it saddens me, that I see as a third point a hardening of deeply entrenched statist approach on crucial issues. We see a growing rejection of earlier pro-European reforms done for EU membership. And this is a fascinating dimension of the report, as you can compare what happened in 1 year. And we see that the reforms taken to introduce more freedom of thought and expression, the abolition of the death penalty, the learning of the mother tongues, the obstacles to free broadcast, to do away the obstacles for free broadcast, to do away obstacles for the freedom of religion and conscience, that all these reforms are viewed more skeptical today than a year before, and that therefore there is a hardening in these very crucial questions that has a lot to do with any rapprochement with the EU. I have some points more, but I don't want to talk too much. What I think, and it comes as a kind of, I have read it as, we see what Kadri mentioned, that there are these very sad these also very well-established negative perceptions of the EU, where the EU is ascribed of dividing Turkey, that reform in the frame of EU membership equal the capitulation of the Ottoman empires, that Europe acts in a crusader spirit. And Kadri, very rightly so, these are very high percentages. But the interesting thing is they are lower than last year. And for me, I read it in the sense that now, as we are facing so much real tensions, these phantasms, in a way, are losing power, because now we are facing real questions, and therefore I see this as a positive development, disregarding the fact that they are still very, very high. A last point, maybe when it comes to the customs union, the low knowledge of the customs union and the also very low support for the customs union. And here we see that here the positioning or the demand of the Turkish government to come forward with the customs union to reach the entering into the negotiations of the modernization of the customs union is not in a way mirrored by a communication strategy of the government for the customs union to the own population. And I think this is a contradiction in terms, and the government should more do in this regard if it is really serious about deepening economic relations with Europe. What I think is in the true interest of Turkey and of Europe. And in a similar way, I see a kind of contradiction in terms when it comes to some of the opposition parties, because we talked about these very negative views on any compromise in Cyprus and Greece. And the opposition parties, you know, do not have really a different approach or are not propagating a different approach to these issues, but at the same time are in a way, again, trying to reorient Turkey and the Turkish public to European membership. And I think therefore, both the government and the opposition parties have to be a little bit more consistent to really convince the public of their policies.
Günter, thank you very much for that. And thanks to all three of you for these thoughts. I thought, Kadri, I would, and let me just say to our audience, please do put questions in the Q&A function on the platform here, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. But Kadri, if you like, maybe I just go to you first, just to see if you wanted to pick up on any of the things that you heard from our discussants before we open it up.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Ian. And thank you, Senem Hoca, Günter, Paul, for this great comments. I would like to first say something about what Günter said. I mean, Günter said that this positive perception of the EU is more, it seems to be more a reflection of what is going on in Ukraine. But actually, when we compare with the last year, there is also this perception, this positive perception. But I think what is also important here, I think that people, because this perception, positive perception on EU is not always reflected in a positive perception against single European individual countries, except Germany. So it means that I have impression that is also because this positive perception on EU is also a reflection of what it's felt in the country. So the economic situation is deteriorating. The democracy and rule of law standards are just becoming are deteriorating, and I think this perception is also a bit this feeling of seeing what is going on, what is going badly in the country. So they want to see maybe this perception is a bit a reflection of this. I don't know if I explain it well, but so I think it's really this explaining more than really what is going on in Ukraine, because we have seen this last year too. So it's difficult to see because the economic situation also deteriorated significantly in Turkey. So it's difficult in this situation to see which affected more, the economic situation or the war in Ukraine. But I think this idea about what is going on in the country is probably affecting this, and it's a reflection of what's going on in the country. And again, you mentioned about those some steps or some reforms done or steps Turkey has taken in the past or for the EU accession process, or the steps that it may take in the future. We have to apologize because it's true that in the key findings or in the presentation, we don't see all these details. But actually, even if the approval rate is not incredibly high, maybe for, you know, for the freedom of thought or expression or abolition laws that prevent citizens from learning their language, or about Kurdish language we are speaking here mostly. Actually, even if the approval rate is not very high, but there are few people, I mean, it's almost 20% of the respondents are disapproving this kind of steps. But I mean, I'm sorry, but it's true that in the key findings, maybe in the presentation, we don't see these details. It's our fault, and I apologize for this. So it may push you to, but you are right, of course, on the Cyprus issue and also the problems with Greece. Absolutely. The majority of people, they don't want to have a compromises on those issues, and this is really worrying, I may say. Last thing, maybe shortly before, because it would be great to have more time for the Q&A on the climate issue. Senem just said that what role the European Union, which leadership role can European Union play? A question about it. Obviously, we don't have a question like that, but we had a question that. We are asking which role, who should play the biggest role in combating climate change, and we are mentioning private sectors, factories, you know, industry, different international organization, NATO, or sorry, UN, EU, etc. It's true that the majority are, but it's because of the question as well. They are mentioning, and I think it's rightly. Well directed to the private sector, and probably they are thinking that the industry is playing enormous role on the climate issue. So the European Union is really low. So, but as I said, how is the question is asked also is affecting how the people are answering in this question. Yeah, over to you. Go ahead.
Kadri, thank you very much. And we have accumulated quite a few interesting questions. I did want to pose one of my own, though, if you'll allow me, because we have plenty of time. One goes to a question that we actually got. One we didn't. The survey itself is not primarily about social and political attitudes in Turkey. It's about other things, but you could infer some things from some of the answers. And it does strike me in looking at this that the respondents seem to be a little bit more liberal than the leadership in the country when it comes to, if we take views about the ECHR, for example, or other kinds of things into account. You know, I don't know. It's not a discussion about the elections or Turkish politics, but you know, what does it tell us? I mean, if any of the discussants want to perhaps weigh in on this, what could you infer from this about, you know, what's actually going on in Turkish politics and society? Anyone who wants to, I'm perfectly happy just to leave it out there as an open question too, but Senem, go ahead, please.
Well, I don't know, I was thinking maybe we'll go in the same order, so that's
no, just carry on, please.
I mean, to me, yes, I have noticed that too, and I've been noticing that in a number of surveys, actually, that I've had a chance to look at in the past few years or so. And I think one thing that I think that we are coming to realize, and that's something that Kadri has picked up on as well, is that some of those responses have to be evaluated in the context of people's growing dissatisfaction with the government, especially with the failing economy, governance standards, rule of law, all kinds of things. And people are looking for a way out. Even this massive push for visa liberalization or support, I don't think I can interpret it without thinking of this feeling of being squeezed in Turkey by Turkey's citizens at large because of the environment and the context in which they're living in. So I think much of it has to do with that. I think it tells us that people are increasingly dissatisfied with governance standards, with climate change, with the wildfires, with the economy, you name it. And I think this reflects on their perceptions and on their search for a way out with whichever institution or region, etc., that might come in handy to that effect. And I think this is something that I saw in my own research back in 2018, that, you know, this normative appeal of Europe has also increased precisely because of this search, this need for an external anchor for rule of law, including the European Court of Human Rights. Of course, one can say that this is only one part of the population. That is correct, right? That's about 40%, 50% or so, but it's not a negligible amount for Turkish politics. It's an important, sizable majority, or at least half of the population. And so I think it's important. That's what I can say in response to your question.
No, thank you very much. Anyone else on this point? We can also move on. We have other things.
Well, maybe. I mean, I think it's an interesting observation, and I think there's something to it. But I also think it is also a little bit complex. I mean, because I mean, you get the sense when you read that some of the answers that, you know, many Turks just want to be able to. They want to be able to travel. They want to be able to work abroad. They want to have a strong economy. They want to have reforms that resolve a lot of the issues pertaining to human rights and democracy. So in that sense, yeah, there seems to be sort of a possibility there for kind of a different politics, if you will, than the one that the current government has been pursuing. And you know, maybe one can say that is also reflected in the fact that the government is the opposition is doing well in polls for next year's scheduled elections. But then there's also sort of, you know, there are also these sentiments of the you know, dissatisfaction with the European Union in some respects, and sort of, you know, feeling that, well, it doesn't really matter what we do. A majority of states won't want us to join the European Union anyway. There are these rather kind of nationalistic reactions to some of the questions as well. This fear of the division, the fear that the EU is strengthening the PKK separatists, and so there's a little bit of both as well, I would say. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, another point that we mentioned is the fact that the young generation appears to be more liberal. And that speaks, well, if you will, for the future.
Good to go ahead.
Very shortly, only 2 sentences. We all remember that there are two very well-known sayings with a shirt in the Turkish policies. Some persons claimed to have changed the shirt. That's the one saying, and the other saying is that the shirt for the nation has become, the shirt that the government is in a way drawing on the nation has become too small. And we had this prior to the accession to power of the AKP, and I think we are somewhat in a similar situation, that a lot of large parts of the populace think that the shirt that the government is in a way drawing on the nation is too small. And therefore, I would fully agree what you said, Ian, that there is the population, there is considerable parts of the population are more liberal than the leadership. And the last remark, I still remember, as we are all dealing since long with Turkey, that there had been times in which the European Union had not only been, in a way, accused of negative intentions, but where Europe as such was perceived as a threat. And now Europe is not longer in the list of threats to the country. And I think this is very important, because if you are viewing somebody as a threat, you are not able to be susceptible to the normative approach of Europe. And I think this is a great step forward compared to earlier decades.
Okay, Günter, thank you very much. I mean, one of the intents with these surveys at GMF is obviously to illuminate certain views in Turkey, but and to discuss them, but actually to go beyond that and use this in some sense as a platform for talking about some bigger issues as well. And with that, maybe I can turn to some of the questions that have come in. Ambassador Selim Yenal has asked a question. Do you think both sides are content with the current relationship, Turkey-EU? Turkey is not pursuing membership as before, except in lip service, and the EU is not pushing hard regarding fundamental rights and other reforms. Do you see, in your observations or from the results here, a kind of degree of, we could say, complacency, or is there more aspiration embedded here, perhaps, than current policy reflects?
Are we going in the same order again?
Is the relationship going anywhere, in short?
Well,
please.
I can say a few
Go
words.
ahead, Senem, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, about Selim Yenal's question, maybe whether both sides are content. I would say that, again, I'm speculating a little bit here, of course. It's very difficult to tell whether the Turkish side is content or not, and what we mean by the Turkish side. If I take the government, I feel that the government might be pretty content with the way that things are, because I don't think they are sincere. They just pay lip service to this membership issue. They know that it's not realistic, at least in the foreseeable future. They have the migration deal, which, you know, they complain about, but they still do anyway. And especially with the war, I think they felt like now on top of migration, they have another geopolitical leverage with Europe, because they probably feel like Europe can't afford to have Turkey on the outer ranks. So, and as long as they can get away with, you know, violations of democracy and all that, I think they would be fine with it. Now, on the European side, perhaps, again, we have Günter here, we have Paul, we have you, perhaps, you know, you would know better than I do since you're actually there. But my feeling is that Europe would probably prefer a more reliable and credible partner to work with. One that they can rely on, for instance, with the migration deal, knowing that, you know, it won't be subject to political bargaining or, you know, at future conflicts. And also about, you know, customs union modernization. We know that especially big business in some countries are in favor of it, but because of political difficulties, it can't be modernized, etc. So I feel like probably Europe feels like there's more that can be done, but it's difficult to work with the current government. So that is why that's how I would interpret it. That's how I see it anyway.
Okay. Other thoughts on this one? And Kadri, feel free to weigh in too on your side. I mean,
maybe I would add a distinction between, you know, what we mean by both sides. I mean, and the polls, the survey seems to me to suggest that to a lot of Turks, you know, they see potential benefits for themselves of Turkish EU membership.
I meant the government. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. No, I mean, but if I'm allowed to complicate Ambassador Yenal's question, so I mean, so you know, if we look at the majority of Turks are not content with this situation. I think they're disappointed that the EU does not let them in, that the government is not enacting sufficient reforms, and they would like to see you know, membership. As for the two sides, I mean, I think maybe a better way of describing it is that we've reached some kind of maybe unpleasant and uncomfortable Pareto optimal situation, such that nobody's really happy with what we have. Nobody wants to have a facade of EU accession that everybody knows right now is not going anywhere. There are calls within the EU from the European Parliament to cancel the accession process, but everybody also knows that if we do that, then there is no chance of resurrecting it, or it will be very difficult sometime down the line. There's also, you know, if we cancel negotiations, which maybe would be the right thing to do in many respects, there's no opportunity for the EU to provide, you know, pre-accession assistance and try to support Turkish civil society actors in many ways. So, you know, it's more, I find like it's almost more a question of we don't really like the situation, but it's moving out of it to another situation would be worse. That would be my way to describe it.
May I?
Please.
Yes, I fully agree with what Senem said. In my view, also the government, the Turkish government, is not sincere on really the membership quest. But on the other hand, what we saw now, what is happening in Ukraine, I think has completely done away with what Paul Levin rightly said, that the European Parliament is talking about suspension of the membership negotiations, and one of the German new coalition partners, the Liberal Democrats, they also asked for the suspension of the negotiations. And now, as Turkey is much more in the center now, also of a changing security policy and a changing energy policy, then I think these discussions are not going anywhere at the moment. And when it comes to the Turkish side, I think the government is not sincere, but it uses the demand for an improvement in the in the EU membership relations to put pressure on European countries to come forward in quite a different area, namely in the area of defense, PESCO, high-level security dialogues, and most important, the doing away with arms export restrictions. And I think this is a very deliberate strategy, and I think it might work, because I think since the end of the Cold War, for the first time we are discussing EU membership or EU enlargement or new ties of the EU with potential candidates from the background of security policy. And this naturally leads to a kind of a tendency where Europe might compromise on its normative demands, at least in the perception of some of the parties. And I think naturally it's an understandable strategy, but it can't be sincere, because I think the Turkish government is well aware that given this complex structure of Europe, where nothing goes without, for example, when it comes to membership, without the European Parliament and without the consensus of all member states, these processes and enhance in security cooperation and enhance in energy cooperation should not be mixed up with demands of improvement in the EU membership, because this will only create frustration, and therefore every area of cooperation should be approached and measured in their own terms. I think then we will have a more stable relationship.
Ian, if I just one quick word, just in the interest of fairness, that we've noted that the Turkish government is not necessarily sincere when it comes to EU membership aspirations, but one could also turn the tables and say that there are questions as to whether the EU has been entirely sincere in opening and welcoming Turkey as a full member of the EU.
I was just I was thinking to mention this, and
we fully agree.
I will now, that when we were asking for many years in our transatlantic trend survey, which of course was 12 different countries, including Turkey, and on both sides of the Atlantic, and we asked for quite a few years about attitudes towards Turkish membership, very much as they were put here in the question to the Turkish population. Are you in favor? Do you think it will happen? And the result in Turkey was more or less over the years as you portray it here, Kadri. When you asked Europeans about this, some differences in some different places, but on the whole, they had an inverse response. Do you think it will happen? Do you like the idea? No. Do you think it will happen? Yes. Very interesting. I mean, it also tells you a little bit about Brexit, which is not our subject today. But anyway, let me go to another question here. Or Kadri, did you want to come in on precisely?
Quickly on this point, I would like to say that they are maybe not content, but they are satisfied, let's say, by this situation, both because we saw the situation. Just 2 years. It was the autumn 2020 that the tension decreased in the East Med. We saw that, many years we were just speaking about the breaking up of the relations, so a huge tension, etc. So in this sense, I think the current situation, it should be satisfying both for Turkish government. Yeah, I completely agree with Senem and Günter, obviously. I mean, I don't believe that the Turkish government is really interested in the accession process. It's just EU is, is sometimes just needed or instrumentalized for the political purposes and for internal audience, or sometimes is when we since 1 year we see that actually there is also a tendency to improve because there are also economic considerations or others. But for the European Union especially, if this internal political situation in Turkey is a huge excuse to, basically to not even mention the accession process. So in this sense, of course, for the Europeans, but then of course there are geopolitical discontent that are much more difficult. So why is it's important to remind the Europeans that actually this maybe this situation can be satisfying for the short term, but in the long term, if geopolitically diverging Turkey, I mean, the dialogue would become even much more difficult in the future.
So let me go back to some of the questions that have come in. And actually the first question that we got, which was from Alexander Karapiperis, who was asking, with all this anti-Western feeling, I guess it is meant to say, over the last 6 years in Turkish society, especially after the July 2016 coup, how easy would it be for the current government to make a U-turn and to restore its relations with its natural allies in the West? I mean, this is actually a very interesting question, given the fact that there is, some optimism that I detect in both Washington and Brussels that somehow, the war in Ukraine will concentrate minds about the need to reinforce Turkey's natural relationships with allies in NATO and so forth. But still, there are embedded questions of mistrust, which come out very clearly in this survey. Given that, how easy would it be to turn this around? An easy question for everyone, but I'm happy to
jump in.
Go ahead, Paul.
Well, no, but I would say that we've already seen an attempt to such a turnaround, right? We've seen kind of a diplomatic charm offensive from the government now, meeting with the Greek PM and trying to improve ties with Israel, with the Gulf states, with which relations have been very problematic over the past few years since the Arab Spring. So, I mean, I think we're sort of in the middle of such a charm offensive. And even, I mean, before the 24th of February, I think my sense is that everyone saw the emerging Ukraine crisis as sort of an opportunity to show Turkey's value to the West and NATO. And the selling of drones and the signing of a free trade agreement, and not only the sale of drones but also joint production plans. Right? All of these things were, I think, a way to show that Turkey has a lot of value to the NATO alliance. So that would be my quick response.
Okay.
Perhaps add something to what Paul has said. I mean, if you look at foreign policy issues, they don't rank very high on the electorate's preferences. There are much more significant issues right now that will determine the way the votes go, including the economy, including the refugee issue. So I don't think foreign policy would rank very high. I mean, of course, that there is certainly a war that's going on, and if Turkish elections would happen today, maybe it would result in a few extra percentages because of the preference for a strong leader at times of distress, like perhaps it happened for Orban, etc. But thinking that we have them as scheduled next year and assuming that things will phase out a little bit until then, I don't think there will be sort of a major impact on, on improved relations with Europe, or, the changes in the Eastern Mediterranean regards Israel and EU, etc. I don't think they would have a major impact. And also, I don't think we should underestimate the way in which the government controls the sources of information in the country. So they can twist and turn their constituency to some extent, and their constituency seems to respond to the justifications that are given by the government, especially on such issues. So yeah.
Okay.
Very shortly.
Please, Günter.
Yes. No, but I don't want to steal too much time. But
No,
because as the question was related to the cooperation on the refugee file, kapılar açani, open your gates, and also as Senem has said. Now the government has the refugee deal, or the migration deal. I'm not so sure of this, because I think there is still no definite answer of the European Commission regarding the continuation of the cooperation. And there is, at the same time, to my knowledge, but I'm not an expert on it, but to my knowledge, we have a kind of, very sadly, normalization of pushbacks on the European border. In Greece, in Poland, and in the central Mediterranean, and therefore, and we have the events of February 2020, where it was tried to in a way to channel migrants to Europe, and this did not work, and therefore, and what the President of the European Commission said at that time, that Europe's borders are defended at the Greece borders. I think we have a new reality, and therefore I'm concerned about the long time it takes that the European Commission comes forward with the continuation of the migration cooperation, and this in a time when Europe faces an unseen wave of new migration. And I think this might lead to a decision that to reduce the cooperation, which would not be, because Europe feels not longer so dependent on Turkey in this issue, and it has some cards in its hand to argue that we have not the financial resources. But I think this would be a very short-term approach, and it would not be in the benefit for Turkey. It would not benefit in the benefit for EU-Turkey relations, and therefore I think we should underline the necessity to continue this cooperation, even if Europe is not feeling itself under the pressure as before.
Günter, thanks. And in fact, there's a question very much in this space, and so perhaps I'll put that to you all, and maybe it's most appropriate for those who are actually looking at this from inside the country at the moment. But Francesca Knaus asks, how is the refugee crisis perceived in light of the war in Ukraine, the arrival of new refugees from Ukraine and Russia, but also the perceptions regarding Syrian refugees during times of high inflation and economic crisis? I don't know if we asked about this directly, Kadri, and there was a question, I think, that somewhat related to this, but feel free to reflect on it anyway. Senem, maybe I could start with you.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I'll start with the point that Günter has made. I mean, you're right, Günter, but I also think, now I'm just thinking out loud now, whether it could also have the opposite effect, in the sense that the EU is now, or will be, facing with this large exodus of Ukrainian migrants. So with the temporary protection scheme and everything, I mean, right now, everybody is very welcoming since there is a war that's going on and everything. But I wonder if they can also afford to have the southern borders questioned, at least a similar kind of push at the southern border at the same, while they're engaged with the refugees from the east. I mean, from a public opinion point of view, okay, because this would make it to the news. Of course, I agree with you. Pushback is now normalized. Nobody cares. International law, human rights, it's not such a big issue as long as the migrants are kept out. That's the perception. That's a normalized policy. But I feel that this would still make it to the public sphere. And whenever it does, then you have heightened fears of migration. Then you have populist parties rising in popularity and all that. So whilst trying to digest refugees from Ukraine. I'm not sure if the EU or EU countries could afford to have such scandalous sort of views on media like they did in 2020. So I'm just thinking out loud whether they can do that or not. About how the refugee issue is perceived. I mean, this is also something that I was thinking about when I was reading the survey results, because it seems to me as if, okay, we have other surveys in Turkey which show that there is an anti-refugee stance that's growing and growing in Turkey, and that unites the opposition and the government constituencies. So this is one of the rare issues on which the Turkish public agrees. It's a sort of a point of negative consensus, as you can refer to that. And this, I think, is quite dangerous. Because I think the integration policies are far behind. And also this shows that the Turkish people are now beginning to take notice of the fact that the Syrians are here to stay. The government's discourse that they were just guests that were going to leave no longer finds an audience. Now it's sinking in that they're here to stay. And this is resulting in resentment. And I think this can have ramifications in the elections as well, but also in general societal unrest that's bubbling. And to me personally, this is concerning as to where it can go. But what I see from the survey, and this is what I was going to come back to, is I'm not sure if the Turkish public really associates these Syrian migrants and the fact that most of them are in Turkey with the agreement that's been made with the EU. Because it seems like migration cooperation is still looked favorably upon. But are they realizing that it's an end result of that migration cooperation that Turkey ends up with 4 million something refugees, which the public has building this resentment towards? So that kind of, to me, is quite a bit of a puzzle. And since the refugee issue has been a bit of a taboo for the main opposition as well, its sort of association with the European Union hasn't been made so much in the public sphere. So it hasn't so far translated into a similar resentment for the EU as well. But perhaps this might also be something to unpack in the future surveys.
Okay. Kadri, Paul, any thoughts on the migration piece?
Yeah, very quickly, Ian. Of course, I don't live in Turkey since 5 years, so I don't see, I'm just going 4 times maximum, Ankara, Istanbul, or my region, my village. So it's difficult for me to see this anti-migrant feeling, but we can see it from the social media. We can see it from the rhetorics of the different, as Senem just said, from different political parties. And we can see even a clear anti-migrant, a kind of European style xenophobic political parties born, let's say. It's not still in a dangerous maybe level, but it's coming. We can see that. And yesterday I was watching a video of the Minister of the Internal Affairs explaining the people around him why the Afghans and Syrians are important for the jobs that the Kurds or the Turks, they don't want to do anymore. So it means that even the governments actually is aware of this situation, that there is a really huge anti-migrant, especially anti-Syrian feelings in the country, and they are trying to maybe find, economic justification on that. So it's quite interesting from this point of view. And of course, the economic situation is, since last year especially, is worsening. The unemployment, even if according to the institution of statistics, is decreasing, but is I don't believe that is really the case, because when we look at the details, actually the active population maybe is decreasing, but there's a huge issue. I mean, economic situation is quite tough, so this will only worsen the situation. One quick word on the Ukrainian crisis and how the migration issue, how the Ukrainian migrants were received by Poland, especially as a really xenophobic country. Let's say on the migration issue, I may say, unfortunately, is the case. They were the discussion, of course, against, mostly accusing the Europeans to be, I mean, how, you know, discussion, they were more about the hypocrisy of the Europeans on the white or non-white, migrant, Muslim or non-white. I think that there are, on the Ukrainian context, the migration issue was mostly discussing this in this sense, not really more than this. Yeah.
Okay. Kadri, thank you very much. I'm also a bit, Paul, did you want to weigh in on this one?
Just a quick note. Senem said everything, and Kadri's additions was great. Just, we did see a tweet the other day from the opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, where he sort of did tread a very rather populist line, complaining about holes in the borders and a free-for-all for migrants. So there are suggestions that the opposition may capitalize on it in the upcoming election.
Okay, Paul. Kadri, you know, I just want to maybe conclude by coming back to you with a very brief and slightly unfair question, because everyone of the discussants in a way gave an answer to this in their own comments earlier on. But when you look across this survey, what surprised you? I mean, if you were to pick out one thing very briefly, what surprised you?
Difficult question. Actually, I may say that I am rarely surprised in the life. so why what surprised me really most.
Well, while Kadri's thinking, can I note one thing that did surprise me?
Please go ahead, Paul.
Okay, I can say it real quick. It was really striking to me that you had such a strong percentage of Turks in the midst of a terrible economic recession who said that they thought that climate change was the biggest threat and that it should be there should be actions taken toward it, even at the expense of slower economic growth and jobs. I thought that was quite striking.
That's striking. That's
good point, Wayne. Absolutely, good point.
That's very striking. Now, Kadri, it was somewhat.
I'm really not surprised by any of
versed in this. So.
Yeah.
So there it is. Maybe you're most surprised that it actually got done on the end. It's out. People are paying attention to it, and that's always a good thing. But and also a very good way to end. Let me thank all of you for this. Senem, Günter, Paul, thanks for agreeing to be with us to discuss the findings. Kadri, above all, thank you to you for leading this project and for briefing it. I'm sure it'll get a lot of attention. Allow me just to thank some others as well. My colleagues, our colleagues, Özgür and Ceylan in Ankara, who were key participants in this project, and many thanks to them for their help on that. Also to Annika Vollmer and to Alexandria Chastanet-de-Géry here in Brussels, who made this happen in very practical ways, and to our communications team at GMF for their help, as always, in making this happen. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you who have joined us today. My apologies to those whose questions I didn't get to, but we had a very deep discussion, which is always good. And we look forward to seeing you back with us at GMF, either in person or virtually again soon. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.